Barbarians, chapters 22, 23, and 24, Exit Wounds. I put my armor on. Show you how strong I am. I put my armor on. I'll show you that I'm unstoppable. I'm a Porsche with no brakes. I'm invincible. Yeah, I win every single game. I'm so powerful, I don't need batteries to play. I'm so confident. I'm unstoppable today, Sia. Unstoppable. They glided silently in the dark, 4 holes in space, as the Konim fleet grew ever larger in their displays. The cramped courier boat they had commandeered for this mission now drifted far behind them, lost in the glare of U-12's sun, powered down and cold. This whole mission had been a gamble from the start, but it seemed that Dame Fortuna had smiled on them after all. Their suits were heavily stealthed. Even the small bursts from their thrusters as they steered for their target were shielded. Their chosen target grew rapidly in size, from child's toy to massive behemoth, their suit thrusters now slowing them down as they drew closer. One last course correction. Their knees flexed as they landed one after another, locking onto the ship's hull with powerful electromagnets in their gloves and boots. "Contact," Musashi said quietly over the link. The reward for work well done is more work. Musashi had no idea who had coined that particular phrase, but truer words were never spoken. After their extraction from Uzonks and subsequent debrief, the powers that be lavished them with praise for a job well done. The intel they'd gathered, along with the prisoner they'd secured, had been a treasure trove of data. Despite learning the somewhat awkward fact mankind had joined the war because of a lie. Luckily for him, those sorts of decisions were way above his pay grade. He'd done his job, mission accomplished, now comes Miller time. Yeah, right. The information they'd gleaned had only whet the appetites of the intelligence community. For every question they'd answered, 100 more were now raised. After several days of questioning, their prisoner had told them where they could find the data they sought. In the data cores of the Konhim ships. In fact, Chatorj had initially claimed the information they were looking for didn't exist anywhere, but quickly changed his tune after Whisper dropped by for a chat. A dozen schemes were considered to retrieve the data, all of which were quickly rejected. In the end, there was only one way even remotely possible to pull it off, a mission so risky no oddsmaker would have taken a bet on. They'd begun training almost immediately, but the joker in the deck was not just locating the Konhim fleet, but getting the team on site before they departed. All they could do was wait, train, and hope luck was on their side. As it happened, U-12 was just close enough for them to risk the attempt. They'd quickly bundled aboard the courier boat, redlined the engines, and arrived to find the Konhim still in system. Apparently, they had remained to perform repairs on their damaged ships, and that had been the window of opportunity they'd needed. Now they just needed to deliver the goods, and hopefully not get killed in the process. They'd managed to locate a maintenance hatch on the ventral side of the hull, and Greybird was able to quickly hack the computer lockout. Once inside, it got a bit more challenging. "Which way?" Musashi asked as Greybird shrugged helplessly. "I have no idea," he admitted. "I'm going to guess up?" "Up," Musashi repeated deadpan. "Can't you hack into a schematic or something?" "If there was one to hack into, sure, but unfortunately the Konim don't seem to find it necessary. However, since most warships place critical systems like data cores and engine rooms as far from the hull as possible, I'm sticking with up." "Lovely," Musashi sighed. "All right, you heard the man. Tango, you're on point." The blonde nodded, her weapons already up and primed. She'd been disappointed to leave her beloved sniper rifle behind, but for this op, it would just get in the way. Given the close quarters they were operating in, she'd opted for a matched pair of auto pistols instead, using them to cover 2 directions simultaneously. It was a well-known fact that no one could accurately fire 2 guns at once, but whoever made that claim had obviously never met Tango. "Greybird, you're behind Tango," he continued. "We'll need you to hack any locked doors we come across. I'll follow the 2 of you, which means you've got our 6, Whisper." Whisper just grinned. "Oh, goody," he smirked. Musashi sighed once again. "The plan calls for stealth, people, so let's try keeping the body count to a minimum." He gave Whisper a pointed look, who responded with a pout. You're no fun, he said unhappily, before pulling a pair of blades from his belt and spinning them on his fingers. That seemed to mollify him somewhat, so with rolled eyes Musashi gave Tango the nod to move out. They made their way silently down the corridor, pausing at the junctions to avoid detection. Signs of battle damage were everywhere. In fact, they'd chosen one of the incapacitated ships specifically in the hopes they'd be less likely to run into any Konhim guards. So far, it seemed to be working in their favor, but Musashi wanted to get in and out as quickly and quietly as possible, and they couldn't afford to simply wander around the massive vessel forever. One of the side passages led to ladder located within a narrow tube, and after a quick glance to make sure it was clear, they began scurrying up the rungs. Tango froze as she reached the next level, her free hand suddenly clenching into a fist. The others halted behind her, bracing themselves against the ladder and readying their weapons as her hand moved again, this time signaling enemy in sight. The seconds dragged out as they waited, watching for any hint they'd been discovered until Tango finally relaxed. A quick wave and they were moving once more, continuing their climb, moving ever deeper into the bowels of the enemy ship. The ladder dead-ended at the next level, and after another quick peek they climbed out into another corridor, running left and right. Tango glanced back at Musashi, a question in her eyes, and flipping a mental coin he pointed to the right. She acknowledged the order with a brief nod and led off once more, with the rest of the team close on her heels. Repair work had been recently done in this section, with open panels and damaged equipment all around them. Greybird suddenly signaled for attention, pointing to a thick red cable that led from an exposed junction box and trailed down the corridor, apparently a jury-rigged bypass. Data filament, he said softly. Musashi nodded. Follow it, he ordered Tango, who crept along the narrow hallway, keeping the wire in view until it disappeared into an open doorway. Pressing herself up against the wall next to the hatch, she held her pistols at the ready, before disappearing inside. Moments later she reappeared. Clear, she reported, as the rest of the team ducked into the compartment. Tango and Whisper covered the door as Greybird quickly surveyed the odd-looking equipment filling the space. Jackpot, he grinned, pulling out his gear and connecting to one of the consoles. Making the link now, he reported as he got to work. So far, everything had gone perfectly, but the longer they stayed, the more they risked detection. Musashi wanted to ask Greybird for an ETA, but jogging his elbow would only slow him down. It would take as long as took. Musashi turned to join the others at the door, just as Whisper signaled 2 Konhim were approaching. A quick glance around the compartment confirmed there was no place the 4 of them could hide, and with a grimace, he signaled back, drawing a finger across his throat. Whisper's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning, while Tango holstered her pistols and drew a combat knife. Musashi took a position to cover Greybird, his shotgun pulled in tight against his shoulder for backup. Time seemed to stand still until a pair of Konhim entered the compartment, their eyes going wide as they spotted Musashi and Greybird. Their eyes went even wider as Whisper and Tango slit their throats. One made a brief, gurgling noise as Tango lowered his body to the deck, while Whisper's died without a sound. They dragged the bodies into the compartment, stacking them in a corner, while Musashi slowly rose to his feet. Shit, he groaned. Let's hope no one's looking for them. He turned back to Greybird. You're on the clock, he informed him. I know, the hacker replied. I'm almost through the firewall. There was nothing he could do to speed up the process. He turned back to the others. I think we'd better plan for company, he said unhappily. I suppose it's possible they were going off shift, but I wouldn't bet on it. Whisper cleaned his blade on the dead alien's uniform. Does this mean I get to break out the party favors? He asked, hopefully. Yes, Musashi grumbled. He'd been so hoping it wouldn't come to this, even though he'd known it wasn't likely. Tango and I will cover the door while you set up, he told him, taking over his position as Whisper grinned back at him, sliding off his ruck and digging through the contents. Won't this be fun? He chuckled. Musashi and Tango shared a look, sighing in unison. Freaking lunatic. The only thing he likes more than his goddamn knives are things that go boom, he thought morosely. Though by the way Tango was shaking her head, he was fairly certain she was thinking the exact same thing. Whisper busied himself preparing their surprise for any unwanted guests, when Greybird suddenly spoke up. "I'm in," he announced. "Starting the download now." "How long?" Musashi asked. Time was of the essence, and the itchy feeling in the middle of his back was getting worse by the minute. "No idea," Greybird replied. "It's an odd setup. Half an hour, maybe?" "Wonderful," Musashi lamented. In half an hour they could all be dead. "Movement?" Tango said softly, pulling back behind the hatch. Musashi nodded grimly and risked a peek into the corridor. A single Konheim was heading towards them, lugging what appeared to be a toolkit while looking over some sort of tablet. Maybe he'll pass without looking in, he prayed silently. But as the seconds dragged on, there was no sign of the technician. He and Tango looked at each other in confusion, but as he turned back to cover his sector, he happened to glance down at the deck, at the small puddle of bright orange blood they'd overlooked in their haste. Musashi swore at his own carelessness, before daring to take a second look in the corridor. This time it was empty, and with a desperate sense of optimism he whispered to Tango, "Maybe he didn't notice?" She gave him a pitying look as the klaxons began to blare. "Fuck me," he groaned before he started barking orders. "Cut that cable and seal the hatch," he ordered Tango, who as always was 2 steps ahead of him. "Greybird?" "I suggest you expedite," he said sarcastically before turning to Whisper. "I'd say you have about 2 minutes before the cavalry arrives," he informed him, as the hatch door slid shut. "You prepped?" "Absolutely," Whisper smirked as he picked up one of the charges and slapped it on the hatch. "Just say the word, and I'll blow that door wide open." "Pretty sure they'll do that for us," Musashi said sarcastically, as the sound of pounding feet came charging up the corridor. Tango pulled back and drew her pistols, pointing them at the door as she took a knee, while he covered the other side with his shotgun. Whisper fiddled with the detonator, sending chills up Musashi's spine. "You do realize the plan is to make it out alive, right?" he asked him. "Of course," he laughed. "But how about we have some fun first?" He was still laughing as he pressed the button. Feel the bile rising from your guilty past with your nerves in tatters. As the cockleshell shatters and the hammers batter down your door, you better run, Pink Floyd. Run like hell. The explosion rocked the corridor on the other side of the sealed hatch, as Musashi turned on Whisper in sudden fury. "You lunatic!" he shouted. "You could have killed us!" "Not a chance," Whisper smirked. "I placed those charges facing away from the door. Besides, I just did you a favor." "A favor?" Musashi howled as Whisper's grin grew even wider. "Absolutely. Notice how you don't hear the pitter-pat of Konim feet out in the corridor anymore?" Musashi stared at him for a moment, before turning back towards the door. Now that the blast had subsided, it did sound rather quiet out there. Whisper was having the time of his life. See, if I hadn't blown those charges, right about now the Konhim would be blasting their way in. Greybird said he needed another half hour to finish the download, remember? Musashi had a sudden sinking feeling he knew where this conversation was headed. "Your point?" he said rather testily. "My point is that I'm fairly certain the Konhim are going to be just a wee bit more cautious in approaching that hatchway now," Whisper chuckled. "They're going to take some time to gather reinforcements and come up with an assault plan. By time they do, we should be just about ready to depart." He looked thoroughly pleased with himself, the blade coming out once as he twirled it around his fingers. Musashi counted a full 10 Mississippis in his head before he trusted his own voice to respond. "Whisper, I realize this may come as a shock to you, but we are supposed to be a team. Teams communicate with each other, you know, little things like, 'Hey guys, I'm gonna blow up a bomb.' Stuff like that, so we aren't all surprised. And you realize you're supposed to clear that sort of thing with your team leader, right?" Even if you were right, he thought sourly, though there was no way he was telling him that. Whisper stared at him blankly as Musashi sighed. That would be me. Their pet psycho seemed singularly unimpressed. Fine, he replied, waving his hand in a dismissive gesture. Realizing that was about the best he could hope for, Musashi sighed again before turning to Greybird. How much longer? At least another 15 minutes, Greybird shot back. It's not like this sort of thing is an exact science. Tango watched the exchange with amused detachment, before Musashi looked back at her. Watch the door. And if Whisper pulls another stunt like that without telling us, you have my permission to shoot him. There was a certain feral cast to Tango's languid smile as she regarded Whisper thoughtfully, while he returned her gaze with an even wider grin. Nothing ever seemed to faze the guy, which at times could be a bigger headache than it was a help. Like this one, for example. All right, he continued, pinching his nose. When we're ready to depart, Whisper blows the door after he'd been damn well told to do it, he said rather pointedly. And we're out of here while the debris is still falling. Given that the entire fleet must know we're here by now, we'll have to use the alternate exfil route. Any questions? There were none. They might all have their quirks, although that term was more than a little generous when describing Whisper. But they were also consummate professionals. They all knew the drill. The minutes slowly ticked by, and Musashi could feel himself growing increasingly agitated as the time dragged out. They could also hear movement out in the corridor again, but this time he managed to keep Whisper from blowing anything else up, though part of him suspected he was only being humored. The Konhim had to be busily sealing off the exits, and the longer they waited, the worse the odds. Got it! Greybird shouted at last, as he began bundling up his gear. Thank God, Musashi muttered, before looking at the rest of the team. All right, get ready on the count of 3, we blow the door, he informed them. Before the dust clears, we're up and moving, and keep your grenades handy. Something tells me we'll be needing them. He grimaced, as the 4 of them took up defensive positions away from the hatch. Okay, 1, 2, 3. On 3, the hatch disintegrated in a massive explosion, though thankfully with the shaped charge they'd used, the blast was all directed outward. Shrapnel from the door was still tearing through the corridor as they were up and moving, Tango in the lead with her pistols eagerly seeking targets. Konhim bodies littered the hallway amidst the debris, torn apart by 2 separate charges as they blitzed their way back the way they'd came, and ran straight into a roadblock, a hastily constructed barrier covering a Konhim squad. Grenades! Musashi shouted, though the command was unnecessary. Their frags were already in the air as they dove for cover, peppering the improvised palisade with gunfire to keep their heads down. The explosions detonated almost as one, and at the sound of the blast, they were up and moving once more. The one thing they could absolutely not do was get pinned down, giving the enemy time to maneuver around them and seal off any hope of escape. The Konhim knew the ship's layout far better than they did, so they had to keep moving, even if their headlong rush took them in the wrong direction. Past the barricade, they were back at the ladder, and more grenades were dropped down the tube to clear the way. This was a major danger zone. Until they actually dropped down to the next level, they'd have no idea where the Konhim were waiting. The grenades would clear out anyone close, but if they were smart, and so far the Konhim were definitely making the smart moves, they'd pull back behind cover and open fire before they'd gotten themselves regrouped. If they were very smart, they'd set up in 2 or more separate corridors and catch them in a crossfire. But if they could stay one step ahead of the reaction forces, then they might just have a chance. Tango dropped down the tube as the grenades detonated, firemanning the ladder with her pistols at the ready, with Musashi right on her heels. She hit the floor with a tuck and roll and came up shooting as he landed behind her, his shotgun pumping out one round after another as they smashed their way through the ambush. Speed was everything. Never give them a chance to react or recover. Shoot their way past and just keep moving. More bodies piled up as the Konhim's shots went wild, and as Greybird and Whisper landed behind them, they were already down the corridor, the airlock just a few dozen meters away. Once they were out, they were golden. The chances of the enemy picking them up once they were in space was slim. Not impossible, but the odds would be in their favor. Just around the corner, and the team came skidding to a halt, as they ran up against a massive piece of equipment blocking their escape. Somehow they'd managed to guess their route and blocked the exit, which could only mean, "Back!" Musashi shouted desperately, just as the trap was sprung. Dozens of Konhim came boiling out of the corridors, cutting off their only chance at freedom. The team hit the deck and returned fire, and while they were holding their own for the moment, their position was completely untenable. The Konhim seemed content to contain them, blocking off any possible exit as more reinforcements were brought in. They recognized just how dangerous the team was, and if they were prepared to play the long game and soak up casualties, they'd have no other choice than to surrender. Their plan was as brilliant as it was simple, only they'd made one critical mistake. They hadn't factored in a madman. As the trap closed in on them, Whisper leapt into the fray, his beloved knives flashing as he whirled like a dervish, slashing and stabbing any Konhim foolish enough to get within arm's reach. The enemy wall recoiled at his deranged attack, and that was all the opening they needed. Tango was a heartbeat behind him, her arms raised as she fired round after round, a deadly Valkyrie come to claim her due. Musashi and Greybird quickly added their fire as well, as the enemy will to fight crumbled against the desperate onslaught. With Whisper in the lead, they cut their way through the Konhim, coming out the other side of the ambush as they emerged in the clear on the far side. But the moment was fleeting. Already the Konhim were struggling to regroup. The team quickly retreated from the killing zone, backpedaling as fast their feet would carry them as they fired again and again. If the enemy had anticipated this, they'd be dead in the water, as all their firepower was pointed to the rear and focused on breaking contact. Tango's icy cold stare stood in sharp contrast to Whisper's wild-eyed mania, and yet the two together were far more than the sum of their parts. Resistance suddenly seemed to melt away behind them, as the four of them turned on their heels in unison and bolted for safety. They had to find a way off the Konhim ship, for the alternative was simply unacceptable in any of their minds. They could hear the Konhim's howls of anger and dismay as the enemy horde gave chase. There had to be other airlocks, other ways off the ship, but in their mad run and gun, the team had become hopelessly disoriented, forcing them to simply pick a direction at random and hope for the best. Their pursuit was drawing near, but another tossed grenade briefly gave the hounds pause. Ammo was growing desperately low, and if they didn't find a way out soon— "Here!" Greybird shouted, pointing down a side corridor. The rest of the team followed without thinking, bundling their way into a cramped antechamber that, thank the gods, held an airlock. But the gods are known to be tricksters, capricious and temperamental, and their joy at finding escape quickly turned to dismay as they realized the airlock, their path to freedom, had been damaged in attack and would not open. The sound of their pursuit was growing steadily louder as their options quickly dwindled to zero. "Shit!" Musashi said in dismay. "That's the ball game." "Oh, I wouldn't say that." Whisper grinned, digging into his bag of tricks, and pulled out their last explosive charge. The idea was insane. They were too close, and if they tried blowing the airlock from that position, it would kill them all, just as surely as the Konhim would, which left only one option open. "Set the charge," Musashi ordered, "while the rest of us make some room." A brief nod to the others, and they turned back once more, placing some distance between them and the airlock, just as the Konhim found them at last. The enemy roared their fury as they charged forward, eager to avenge their fallen comrades and crush these few pitiful humans once and for all. The Konhim couldn't be blamed for their recklessness. After all, they had never heard of Bastonia or Cameron or Rorke's Drift. The names Leonidas and Henry V and Davy Crockett meant nothing to them. They simply couldn't comprehend the power humans can somehow tap into when making a final stand. The team was still holding their ground when the charge blew, sucking both them and their attackers into space. Empty spaces, what are we living for? Abandoned places, I guess we know the score, on and on. Does anybody know what we are looking for? Another hero, another mindless crime behind the curtain, in the pantomime Hold the Line. Does anybody want to take it anymore? The show must go on. Queen, the show must go on. Admiral Fujimoto watched the displays as the fleet entered U-12S system, though she already had a suspicion what they were likely to find. Her technicians were already hard at work, scanning for any signs of the Konhim fleet, as they girded their loins to do battle once more. Just not today. Admiral, there's no sign of the Konhim fleet, apart from some wreckage in orbit over U-12, her tactical officer reported. The planetary shield is still down, just as Major Parisi reported in her distress call. Any signals from the Major? Helene asked. The officer checked his board and shook his head. No, ma'am. Nothing? He froze as a message suddenly appeared on his screen. Admiral, I am getting a signal from the surface, but it doesn't carry the Major's ID. Text only, and it must be in code. He shook his head, trying to make sense of what he was reading. What's the message say? Fujimoto asked. It says, we got your cheeseburger. You want fries with that? He looked up her in confusion. Ma'am? Is it possible it got garbled somehow during transmission? Admiral Fujimoto sighed, shaking her head. She had no idea where Antuma had dug up his merry band of lunatics, but they certainly got results. Send a reply. Tell them, we'll take that burger to go. Minister Singh, I believe we should reconsider our position in regards to opening negotiations with the Konhim, Lassorth said adamantly. After the attacks on Uzon-X and U-12, our people have grown even more agitated, despite your efforts to calm their fears. We have received communiques from every world in the Triumvirate, begging us to end this war any way we can. Leandra shook her head. Not yet, Minister. It's too soon. As I said before, any attempts at negotiations now will only be seen as a sign of weakness by the Konhim. Until we can secure a victory, a real victory, not just something we're spinning for our citizens, the Konhim will see it as a sign that we're faltering. They'll redouble their efforts, and then we'll be in real trouble. We are in real trouble now, Minister, Komzoi Shah said hotly. Millions of our citizens are dead, and the rest are terrified they will be next. If you cannot defeat the enemy, then we must secure an end to this war, by any means necessary. We will defeat the Konhim, Singh shot back. But I warned you from the start it wouldn't be resolved overnight. You need to start accepting the possibility this war could drag on for years before it's over. Years? Sigma 121 Sub-Delta said in horror. How can you expect us to let our citizens be murdered by the millions, possibly billions, and do nothing? You expect too much from us, especially since it is not your worlds being attacked. You have no idea what it is we are suffering! Leandra leaned back in her chair, eyeing the Ronin minister coolly. I'll give you a moment to think about that statement. Sigma 121 Sub-D, before I explain what an ass you're making of yourself. The machine said nothing in reply, though whether it was in sullen refusal or guilt, she was unsure. She shook her head in disgust as she eyed the three of them. So we humans know nothing about fear, she said coldly. Let me tell you something. We've been afraid even before we were human. You call us predators? You should see a real predator sometime, the kind we have on Earth. Like the Kodiak grizzly bear, for example, 600 kilograms of claws, teeth, and pure meanness. Or the black mamba, whose venom is so poisonous it can kill a human in less than an hour. Or maybe the jaguar, who will stalk you for kilometers, and you'll never know it's there until it pounces. She smiled thinly as Lassawarth and Komzoi Shah looked physically ill from her descriptions. But of course, the most dangerous creature known to man is man himself. We've been killing each other off in job lots ever since the first ape picked up a rock. We were terrified when the Mongol hordes came sweeping down from the steppes, slaughtering everything in their path. We ran in panic from the blitzkrieg and watched the skies in mind-numbing despair as we waited for the missiles to turn our cities into ash. Her eyes went from one minister to another as they wilted from her gaze. Trust me, we know all about fear, and the lesson we learned I now pass on to you. You can either conquer your fear, or it will conquer you. That is easy for you to say, Sigma 121 Sub-Delta countered. For by your own admission you are a violent race, from a violent world, but we are not. For millennia we have lived in peace and harmony, and you expect us to simply change who we are in an instant? Your wishes are unrealistic, And perhaps it is time for us to reconsider the agreement we made with you when this war began. Leandra couldn't help herself. She started laughing hysterically when the Ronin threw down his gauntlet. "Oh, now there's a plan," she snickered. "And what exactly do you think you'd accomplish without our help?" "You promised us victory, Minister. And yet we have only suffered defeat," Komzoesa countered. "Why should we continue allowing Earth to dictate policy if you do not win?" "Because we're the only hope you've got, Minister," she snarled. "You think you can defeat the Konhim all by yourselves? Then go right ahead. Do it. If we humans are such a hindrance, then say so now, and we will happily get out of your way." "We all acknowledge your species' ability to fight," Lassorth said calmly, "but we question your fitness to lead. As you have stated in the past, our populations number in the trillions, far more than your race. You would do well to remember that, and remember that the bulk of the soldiers now engaged in battle belong to us." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees as Leandra rose to her feet. "Do you think we were foolish enough not to have planned for this?" she hissed at them. "You think we didn't install fail-safes in every weapon and ship we designed if you tried to turn them against us? And as for your soldiers, just who do you think they will follow? The cowards hiding in fear, or the ones who taught them to fight?" Her eyes blazed with fury as she stared them down in turn. "And what do you think the Konhim will be doing if you plunge our species into civil war? I'll tell you exactly what they'll do. Gobble you up one by one while you're fighting us." She shook her head, disgusted by their arrogant stupidity. "We could have crushed you any time we wanted, but we didn't. For the very simple reason that it wasn't in anyone's best interest, yours or ours. But I'm warning you, do not push us, or you'll see firsthand just how dangerous humans really are." A dark smile crossed her face as she reached inside her robe and withdrew a sleek pistol, small enough to fit in her hand, and yet just as deadly as a weapon twice its size. "I've been carrying this for a long time now, and you never once thought to check, did you? Makes you wonder what other surprises we have in store, doesn't it?" The ministers stared at the pistol in horrified fascination and at the viper in their midst. "We stay the course," Leandra said quietly, as she slipped the weapon back inside her clothing, "because any other choice will end very badly for all involved." Rykret scanned the training field until she finally spotted Nasat leading his platoon in a series of drills. She approached carefully, not wishing to disturb him, but as the others in his group noticed her drawing near, he turned and smiled, calling a halt to the training. "Nasat, Sergeant Lin is asking for you," she said quietly, "and there are others with him. Senior officers," she said in concerned tones. Nasat nodded and turned back to the group, pointing at the next senior squad leader. "Continue the drills until I return," he told him, before going to Rykret's side. "Then we should not keep them waiting," he said calmly as they began making their way back to the medical tent. The young healer hugged herself as they walked. "Nasat, why do they wish to speak to you?" she wondered aloud. "Do you think it means we will be leaving Uzonks?" "I do not know," Nasat admitted as they entered the tent. "But do not be afraid. Whatever happens, I will protect you." Ever since the discovery of her family's fate, the acolyte-turned-corporal had become her rock, the one thing that helped maintain her grip on reason, and the two of them had found themselves growing steadily closer. The thought of losing him now terrified her. As they approached Lin's bed, Nasat's eyes widened at the group speaking to the sergeant. Senior officers indeed, including a human clutching a polished wooden baton. He came to a halt and snapped to attention. "Corporal Nasat reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease, Corporal," Marshal Antuma said with a gentle smile, before turning to Lin. "This is the one?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Lin replied, sitting up in his bed, as he gave Nasat an unreadable look. Nasat stared straight ahead, unsure of what to make of this, but absolutely convinced it could be nothing good. "Corporal Nasat, Sergeant Lin has told me a great deal about you," Antuma said. "In fact, he has recommended you to take over Bravo Company while he recuperates." Nasat blinked in surprise. "Sir, I am unqualified for such a position," he stammered. Nasat, you've got the 3 things a good leader needs, Lin said with a twinkle in his eye: brains, heart, and guts. His confusion was growing by leaps and bounds. Sergeant, how does possessing internal organs make me qualified? The humans broke out into laughter. I guess some things just don't translate well, Marshal Antuma chuckled. What the sergeant is saying is that you possess intelligence, courage, and fortitude, all excellent qualities for a leader. Nasat's eyes widened at the unexpected praise, even though he felt completely unworthy of it. He has also recommended you for this, Antuma continued, pulling out a small, flat box. Sergeant Nasat, for single-handedly taking out an enemy weapons platform, for your steadfastness under incredible odds, and for rescuing your commander at great personal cost to yourself, you are hereby awarded the Coeur de Lion, he said in somber tones, as he removed a golden medallion attached to a ribbon and slipped it over his head. Rykret positively beamed at him, as he suddenly found himself at a loss for words. Thank you, sir, he said hoarsely, but I do not deserve such an honor. Lin just chuckled. I did warn you, sir, he grinned. So you did, Antuma smiled before turning his attention back to Nasat. Sergeant, despite the citation, we don't hand out promotions and medals for what you've done. We award them for what we think you're capable of in the future. The smile disappeared as he said somberly, We need you to rebuild Bravo Company and get them ready for the next battle. Of course. I should have known, Nasat realized sadly as he closed his eyes and bowed his head. I will do my best, he said softly, already dreading what was to come.